Welcome everyone to PICHTR's 2022 Forum on the Pacific Islands Climate Collaborative. I see several participants have joined. We truly have an amazing lineup of speakers, and we're just so thrilled that you are here with us today. An objective of the Pacific Islands Climate Collaborative is to promote collaboration between the US, Japan, and partners in Pacific Island countries by coordinating, planning, and executing clean energy and climate adaptation resilience projects. Target Pacific Island countries for today's forum include Fiji, Tonga, Palau, Federated States of Micronesia. So with that, I'd like to ask for the next slide, please. Today's session and tomorrow's session as well is going to be moderated by myself. I am Veronica Rocha. Assisting is also Naoki Nagai. He is also going to be providing remarks throughout the session. And we also have Dexter Payne, who's going to be helping us with IT. To get us started, I would like to ask for two things. The first, and it's quite important, is to please introduce yourself. So everybody who is participating in today's session, including panelists, if you can please introduce yourself. Some suggestions on what you could provide would include your title, your company, where are you calling from, and if you could please tell us about any projects that you may have in terms of Pacific Island countries, clean energy, climate related projects and adaptation or resilience. That would be phenomenal. I would also like to encourage you to please use the chat feature throughout the entire forum, as this is going to be an excellent way for you to network with others. Now, the forum is going to, like I said before, it's packed with a lot of excellent speakers and very rich content. And although we are going to have an opportunity for Q&A, we see this as an opportunity to begin conversations and certainly not an end. So to that effect, we have provided in the agenda, which you should have received by now, information on all of the panelists and presenters, their contact information, their email, their bios. You can feel free to reach out, and certainly please feel free to reach out to myself, Naoki, and others at PICHTR if we can also be of resource to you. At any time, including now, feel free to use the Q&A feature to ask any questions that you may have of anybody who is presenting today. So Naoki, what do you see in the chat in terms of who is here today?
Well, we have Dennis Teranishi, President of PICHTR from Honolulu. We have John Miller, President from Mana Pacific from Hawaii. Please use the chat feature and Q&A anytime. We have Julie from Hawaii, Jacobs. Yes.
Excellent. Okay, next slide, please. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank our generous sponsors, the Atherton Family Foundation and Hawaiian Electric. Next slide. Here's a quick overview of today's session. So first, we're going to have, Dennis is not going to be providing the welcome remarks. I just provided those. A small change in the agenda. Special remarks, however, are going to be provided by Shikata-san, who is the Cabinet Secretary for Public Affairs at the Prime Minister's Office in Japan. Most recently, he was Assistant Minister, Director General Economic Affairs Bureau of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and he has had many other very important positions, for example, in the Embassy of Japan, in China, in Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan as well, the Embassy of Japan in the UK, and several others. He has also been a visiting professor at Kyoto University's Graduate School of Law in Public Policy and Associate Program on the US-Japan Relations at Harvard University. He holds a BA from Kyoto University and a Master's of Public Policy from Harvard Kennedy School of Government. So without further delay, I would like to turn it over to Shikata-san to provide some special remarks for today. Thank you. Naoki, would you like to stop sharing the screen? Perfect, thank you.
Yes, good morning from Tokyo. Can you all hear me?
Yes, very well.
Good.
Welcome.
Well, thank you, Veronica, for your kind introduction. Thank you for inviting me here today. I'm especially glad that I can make it this morning from Tokyo because the day before yesterday, I just returned from accompanying Prime Minister Kishida to India and Cambodia. And now, tonight, I'll be leaving Tokyo for Brussels, again to accompany Prime Minister Kishida to attend the G7 summit meeting and others in Brussels. I'm pleased to speak to you because I have been supporting PICHTR's activities since I was Assistant Director of the Second North America Division of Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the mid-1990s. Those days when I visited Honolulu, I had a chance to meet with Governor George Ariyoshi and Dr. Fujio Matsuda, former president of the University of Hawaii. And from those days, I was trying to promote clean energy cooperation between Hawaii and the Japanese counterparts, including in Okinawa. 5 years ago, I had a chance to visit Hawaii again after visiting Fiji and Tonga in 2017. And throughout all these years, President Denis Teranishi has been kindly extending support for deepening the ties between Japan and the United States. At the outset, I'd like to welcome the successful holding of this webinar and pay my tribute to PICHTR's initiatives. In my remarks, I will briefly explain about number one, Prime Minister Kishida's policy on climate change and clean energy. Number two, the Japan-US initiative on this matter. And number three, importance of PICHTR's activities to achieve Japan's goal and missions. Regarding policies of the Kishida administration, Prime Minister Kishida aims to realize a new form of capitalism and make capitalism more sustainable. In other words, sustainable capitalism by driving the economy with a virtuous cycle of growth and distribution. In particular, Kishida administration's growth strategy focuses on several pillars, including number one, digital, number two, climate change, number three, economic security, and number four, science, technology, and innovation. Among them, the climate change pillar is closely linked to the theme of today's webinar. In 2020, Japan expressed its determination to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. In order to realize this, the Kishida administration intends to reform not only the energy supply structure, but also the entire economy and society, including industrial structure, people's daily lives, and the state of local communities. For example, Japan will develop new technologies such as next generation batteries and motors, hydrogen, and synthetic fuels by utilizing 2 trillion yen or 17 billion US dollars Green Innovation Fund. Looking outside, climate change is seen as an existential threat globally, and thus the whole of world cooperation is essential. In this regard, Japan and the United States should take the lead internationally in creating collective actions to address the challenges making use of advanced technologies. To this end, the key is the Japan-US so-called core partnership and climate partnership launched in April last year. With these partnerships, Japan and the United States will contribute to decarbonize of the Indo-Pacific region, including the South Pacific Island nations through Japan-US Clean Energy Partnership, JUSEP. However, JUSEP alone cannot cover the whole region at once. Therefore, the PICHTR's initiative targeting the Pacific Island countries is crucial to ensure no country is left behind in tackling climate change crisis facing those countries. We hope that this webinar will help industries, academia, and governments in the Indo-Pacific region work hand in hand to address the needs and challenges in the Pacific Island countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those excellent remarks, Shikata-san. It is such a pleasure to have you with us today, and we're always so grateful for your collaboration and support of PICHTR. Next, I would like to ask Naoki Nagai to please provide us some background on today's forum, and in particular, background on the Pacific Islands Climate Collaborative. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica, and thank you, Shikata-san, for the remark and support for the Japanese government. So let me first explain the background of our collaborative effort. Let me start by just a brief introduction of PICHTR. PICHTR is a nonprofit based in Hawaii, and it's been around since the 1980s. It started as a part of the university, but it was spun off to become its independent nonprofit. And its first kind of key project started in the 80s when the President Reagan met Prime Minister Nakasone, and they agreed to do a joint energy project in between the mainland United States and Japan, which was Hawaii. And then PICHTR developed OTEC plant, which is a ocean thermal energy conversion renewable energy plant in Hawaii. And after that, the PICHTR has been facilitating US-Japan energy project in the 80s, including in the Pacific Islands. For example, we have, PICHTR has installed renewable energy in Fiji and has been facilitating joint US and Japan project. And later on, PICHTR has been working more on a federal contract management side, but we have been always interested to revive this program to do a bigger impact in the Pacific region. And then last year, just as Shikata-san mentioned, Japan and the US entered into a new US-Japan climate partnership in April of last year. And this was this contains several components, but one of the key part is to help the third country together, US and Japan together, to assist third countries with the climate change mitigation and adaptation effort. And so this really aligns with our vision and then our heritage, and then we started this collaborative to facilitate joint project in the Pacific Islands with US, Japan, and other partner nations' help. And as you all know, the Pacific Islands are one of the most vulnerable to climate change impact. But due to its size, it's also the most that can benefit from clean energy and climate resilience solutions. And here is the concept of the Pacific Islands Climate Collaborative. And our goal is to bring together 3 stakeholders. The one, of course, being the Pacific Island countries. Second will be the funders and also the implementers. The Pacific Island countries have their own needs for reliable energy for their development, and then also need support to mitigate and adapt to climate change impacts. The funders, they have their different tools and support mechanisms to provide. And then also implementers such as industry and academia, they have the technology and know-how, and then they will also be looking for expanded market opportunities in the Asia Pacific. They have all been doing their great work at a different area on their own, but our goal is to start this dialogue and find this overlapping vision where the Pacific Island needs can be met by using this technology and solutions of the implementers, and also using the support mechanism of the governments. And our goal is to find the sweet spot of joint project. So that would be our goal. And that is why we would appreciate all your interactive participation and dialogue in promoting this collaboration. Just quickly to explain the structure of our forum. We will be spanning over 2 days. We have session 1 and session 2 today, and tomorrow we'll be having session 3. Session 1 will focus on Pacific Island needs. Session 2 will focus on government support measures. And session 3 will be what we call climate solutions expos, where different industry and academia can present potential solutions to climate change. So let's move on to session 1. We'll first begin by Pacific Island country needs. So back to you, Veronica.
Thank you, Naoki. Very much appreciate that. If you can please put up the slide that has all of the presenters for session 1. I'm going to begin introducing each one of them. I am not, unfortunately, we don't have enough time to go through every person's bio. However, we did include every panelist's bio and contact information in the agenda so that you can refer to it. So first speaking is going to be Mr. Aquila Tawake. He is the Deputy Director of Geosources and Energy Program at the GEM Division at the Pacific Community-SPC. We also have a dynamic duo presenting today from Mana Pacific, John Miller, who is the President, Board Director, and Co-founder, as well as Samantha, who does business development and is the operations director there. We will then hear from Mr. Rupani Mario. He's a project development and implementation specialist at the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program. And last but not least, we have Miko Makawa, who is the Senior Research Fellow at the Ocean Policy Research Institute at the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Aquila Tawake for his remarks. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to present today on that topic, clean energy needs in the Pacific Island countries. And I'll be speaking, first of all, identifying some of the major issues that the Pacific Islands region is facing. And then we'll be looking at opportunities and how we are working with a number of partners across the region and beyond in implementing the new energy framework. Yeah, so to start with, I'll be looking at some of the Pacific Islands paradox that the region is being confronted with. One of it is the tropical Pacific. We have sun everywhere, rain regularly for hydropower, and abundant wind for wind power. So we have the renewable resources available to assist with our energy transition across the region. And the Pacific Rim of Fire have been explored for opportunity for geothermal There's a huge potential for a number of countries, but it hasn't been explored at this stage, and high potential for bioenergy and ocean energy. And while having said that, most of the vulnerable, the region is most vulnerable to the climate change impacts of cyclones, typhoons, storm surges, droughts, flooding, and so forth. And despite all those resources or opportunities, the region is still highly dependent on fossil fuel. And the first significant issue that we are facing in the region is the significant progress required for the large increases in renewable energy to support the energy transition across the region. For example, about 80% of the Pacific island countries and territories, commercial energy use is still reliant on petroleum. 72% of electricity is from petroleum. And petroleum power generation has grown at the same rate as renewable energy. As you can see on that graph or on that diagram on the left, as we continue to increase on the renewable energy installation in the region, the petroleum consumption is also increasing. And then the need for large increases in energy efficiency across the region, but very limited funding is available for this to support or improve the region's energy efficiency initiatives. Roughly half of the Pacific island countries and territory electricity use is in buildings, but we have a very poor baseline data available to inform any future energy efficiency initiative. And a good example is the Fiji Parliament complex. It was designed for low energy use. It uses about approximately 25 to 40% less energy than a typical building in our region. And the third issue that we have, energy sector planning and implementation faces increasing uncertainty and risks. And there is a need to routinely plan now for robust and resilient infrastructure, energy infrastructure over longer periods, for example, 30-year lifetime. But data, as I've already mentioned, is inadequate to effectively inform energy planning and measures undertaken throughout the region. And the fourth issue across the region is the transport remains nearly 100% petroleum fueled. As you can see on that graph, for transport is the biggest consumer of fossil fuel in the region, followed by electricity and other sectors. And transport now uses 40% more fuel than power generation in the region. And transition to low carbon in the region, transport is very challenging. And SPC is working with the partners to address this issue. And lastly, the petroleum sector become less stable and supply less secure, while the region is still dependent highly on petroleum. The issue of supply and the price of petroleum in the region is a big issue that needs to be addressed. And also in terms of the safety of the petroleum infrastructure that are installed mostly across the coastal areas in the region, they are susceptible to the impacts of climate change. And in terms of the opportunity for the energy sector in 2020s and beyond, we are looking at the implementation of the new framework to address these issues. And the first opportunity is improving Pacific Island energy security and resilience through renewable energy electricity. As the cost of the renewable energy technologies continue to decline, as you can see here on the solar and wind, that the technology costs have significantly dropped over the last decades. And we are expecting that trend to continue in order for the renewable energy technologies to be sustainable in the region. The second one is improving energy security and resilience through energy efficiency investment, a huge area that with opportunities that the region can tap into in order to contribute to the energy transition in our region. And thirdly, the third opportunity, improving energy security and resilience through low carbon transport technologies. And this is an area that SPC is leading and working in collaboration with various partners through the regional energy policy and program, through the Pacific Center for Renewable Energy and energy efficiency based out of Nuku'alofa in Tonga. And the fourth one is improving petroleum supply security and cost and storage. Excellent opportunity to benefit Pacific Island countries in terms of supply and the cost reduction. But unfortunately, most of the donors are reluctant to support any initiative on petroleum in the region, as they are more interested in renewable energy and energy efficiency initiatives. The fifth one is to address the issue of data in the region. We need to enhance and expand the Pacific Regional Data Repository that is hosted by SPC, and we are working very closely with the World Bank and other partners like the PPA in order to secure the funding to be able to expand in that area. And number 6, the new policy planning and implementation to address risks and uncertainties should improve robustness and resilience of their implementation. Important that crop agencies to assist the countries to manage the risks and uncertainties pertaining to their renewable energy installations and initiative across the region. So, and we are looking at the frameworks that are responsible for this, on how we are going to address this through, first of all, the SDGs, particularly SDGs 7, 9, and 13. And we have a framework, a regional framework called the Framework for Resilience Development in the Pacific, or FRDP, with goal 2 on low carbon development across the region. And we are working with the partners and crop agencies in implementing that framework. And then the new framework for energy, it's called the Framework for Energy Security and Resilience in the Pacific, or FESRIP, 2021 to 2030. And that framework was endorsed by the Pacific Forum leaders in August 2021, and is currently being implemented by SPC. And the long-term goal of the project is to access secure, robust, sustainable, and affordable electricity, transport, fuel, and household energy services that are resilient to climate change and natural disasters. And I need to mention here that this framework is jointly owned by SPC, by the relevant crop agencies, namely SPC as the lead agency, together with SPREP, PPA, the University of the South Pacific, as well as the Pacific Islands Forum. And then these are the main priority areas of this energy framework, from priority A on energy policy planning and capacity development, priority B on energy sector finance and cooperation, C on sustainable electric power development, D low carbon transport energy, and priority E on improved energy efficiency. And then the last one is on petroleum and other liquid fuel services. And under those 6 main priority areas, we have a total of 23 priority initiatives under the new energy framework. And we call it as one framework, many partners. As I mentioned, we are working collaboratively with the regional organizations that with their logo mentioned there, and also other agencies like the IRENA and University of Papua New Guinea and Loughborough University, as well as the University of New South Wales, and other partners that we are also including in our conversation and collaboration moving forward into the next decade are also listed there. So we are looking at a more collaborative approach in implementing the new energy framework for the Pacific. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.
Veronica, you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I wanted to say thank you very much, Mr. Kwila Tawaki, for an excellent presentation. Certainly got a very good overview and appreciation for your energy transition away from petroleum, but also the need to take advantage of those excellent renewable energy resources, the need for low carbon transport, as well as resilience in the region. So really appreciate your comments. Thank you very much. I would like to now turn it over to John Miller and Samantha Frick from Mana Pacific to provide us their remarks. Thank you.
All right. Aloha, talofa, and bula. Thanks for having us here, and thanks for hosting this event. I think this is the most important thing we can do right now. Is it's all about collaboration and coming together and sharing ideas and working together. So I appreciate presenting here. I'm John Miller, president and co-founder at Mana Pacific. We're based out of Maui, Hawaii, but we service all the Pacific Island countries and territories. Our short goal really is trying to help unite the 21 Pacific Island countries and territories, basically helping address and accelerate the adoption of renewable energy. And also speaking today will be Samantha Frick. She's our development director here at Mana Pacific as well. So on today's topic, resiliency needs of the Pacific Islands and the Moana Pledge. Mana Pacific, our goal really is delivering resilient and renewable energy solutions to the Pacific Islands and countries. And for that, that means all resiliency measures, whether it's, helping the economies, helping circular economies, but really, energy is kind of the focal point. As we know, in the Pacific Islands, we have the highest energy rates in the world. We also are, mostly dependent on fossil fuels. So, energy becomes kind of the one resource that's kind of primary to everything we do if we need to address, energy first before we address everything else. But by addressing our energy resource issues first and financing of those renewable energy resources correctly, we can help stop the economic leakage and then use some of the energy savings to directly then reinvest into a lot of our other resiliency projects. So that's kind of why, energy is our focal point, but really long-term goals we're looking at, helping, get our access to clean water and everything else. But at our core, Mana Pacific, because of the development work we do, we looked at, the for-profit model is a model that, has been very extractive in the Pacific Islands. And we've basically been working now, Mana Pacific is a benefit corporation, which means we balance, the people that we serve, as well as the people that work for us, the planet and the renewable energy projects that we do, as well as make sure that these are profitable ventures. And so this is a business model, basically is a business of force for good. That's basically copied by, been led by Patagonia and Seventh Generation Advisors, Terry Tamminen, and other corporations around there. And this is kind of a way for us to be, in the middle space where we're not a nonprofit, but we're also not just a for-profit venture. But at this point, I'll turn it over to Sam, who can kind of talk over, how we, engaged with the Pacific Islands and got into the Moana Pledge. Sam?
All right, I'm not able to turn on my video, so if someone could help with that. Aloha, everyone. It's an honor to be sharing the key findings and the needs we've discovered in the Pacific. At Mana, we've developed a core practice that we listen first. So we conducted and participated in weekly meetings and listening sessions with the Pacific community, the diverse range of experience and backgrounds from the Pacific Power Association utilities, heads of state, regulators, technology vendors, the financial sector, including private finance and development partners, as well as community stakeholders and rights holders, cultural leaders, youth, and NGOs. And much of what we discovered has been affirmed recently. I will turn on my video. By the Pacific Elders Voice. They recently released a letter, and much of this that we found in our listening sessions, they echoed and they discovered, and this represents a lot of the Pacific Island former leaders and heads of state, and they wrote the biggest barriers to building resilience are finance, capacity, technology, and leadership. And I'm now hearing that the term climate change is more accurately being described as climate instability due to the volatility and the extremes. So the bottom line is the real focus needs to be on achieving holistic resilience, socially, environmentally, and economically. So you could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I'll dive deeper into some of these needs. From the finance perspective, PICs need, of course, access to capital and lower cost of capital and more financing options with more favorable terms. And financiers are looking for lower risk and sufficient scale for bankable projects. The costs, of course, need to be reduced, lowering costs across the board from supply chain to cost of development, cost of technology. And the O&M costs are also a significant barrier to renewable energy. A full budgetary plan needs to be in place to look at the long-term maintenance of the system. And we need to look at how we boost the national and local economies to build stability and strength in the region. An example is deploying local labor and local resources as much as possible. And need to look at a bottom-up approach. The local community having a stake and being part of the development process of the projects reduces the risk and increases the long-term maintenance of the infrastructure. And to successfully do this, we have to make sure it's culturally appropriate. And cultural preservation is also a key to social resilience. So workforce development, capacity building, and knowledge exchange of best practices is critical. It's been underscored that collaboration regionally, globally, and with the private and public sector, inclusive of all stakeholder groups, is necessary. From the technology perspective, we need lots of different types of resources. We don't want to rely on just any one technology, also diverse sizes, microgrids, distributed energy resources to build resiliency hubs. There's a need for a central location of data and planning for planning and development purposes and financing across the region, and standardization to ensure appropriate and cost-effective technology is being used for the weather extremes and the limited land availability, and swappability of components is necessary for the long-term O&M, as well as leveraging technology such as blockchain to speed up and simplify the procurement and approvals process. So we can't just look at the lowest cost bids for any one single project in order to really look at the long-term and holistic perspective and look at the value of resiliency. So holistic, symbiotic planning approach is required, and a cross-functional planning in order for stacking benefits and cost reduction. A great example of this is agrivoltaics. So co-locating agriculture and solar, we're all shared during this process. And so addressing equity and energy access needs to be achieved in order to look at holistic resilience as well. So with that in mind, I will hand it over to John to talk more about how we're looking to address some of these needs.
Thank you, Sam. Yeah, and so in short, in the high level here, we basically put together what's called the Moana Pledge. And, more technically, it's the development accelerator engine. It basically helps speed up financing and delivery of renewable energy projects in the Pacific Islands. But more simplistically, what it really is basically forming a cooperative between all the common interests of the Pacific Islands. Individually, a Pacific Island looking for resources or trying to get, most favored nation pricing, their buying power is the smaller than that of a major city in the United States or Japan or Australia. But collectively, the Pacific Islands make up a $57 billion market. And so that gives them the ability to basically, go and get most favored nation pricing for manufacturers. It allows us to kind of blend the risk portfolios of the different islands in order to go get financing for different projects, which maybe now we can unlock financing that doesn't require sovereign guarantees. And then some of the other stuff we can do is, geothermal is a very great resource we really want to explore. One of the most difficult things about it is, the very high risk nature of basically exploring geothermal, and one island might go after it and not, hit a positive, test, but another island is positive and they're able to get geothermal and receive the benefits. But if we can kind of put the islands together in a risk pool, that can really kind of allow all the islands to succeed together, and then no one's kind of doing it on their own. So in short, the goal here is creating this cooperative model. It's a non-binding compact by bringing the islands together on this foundational model of creating a cooperative between the islands to bring their buying power together and accelerate the adoption of renewable energy. And then each territory has its own, sovereignty, laws, and different cultural things, sensitivities. And so each, sovereign nation will basically have its own binding agreements, and then from there, it'll have its own, special clauses to allow us to help accelerate this. But in short, at the end here, we're wrapping up. We're out of time, but really the biggest thing here is climate change is a major issue. Time is not on our side. And the RFP process, I think, is a process that works for a lot of our infrastructure needs. But we're in a situation right now that we're against the clock. So we believe that the Moana Pledge, using a software platform that brings in blockchain and other transparency, will allow us to kind of reinvent a new RFP process that brings the transparency, but also allows us to accelerate the adoption of renewable energy. But thank you for your time, and we'll be available for questions or comments later on, or happy to have a meeting later on. Mahalo and aloha.
Aloha. Thank you so much, John and Samantha, for your excellent presentation and remarks. I really appreciated how your presentation truly complemented the comments that Mr. Aquila Tawake made in terms of the needs in Pacific Island countries. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Rupani Mario, who is also going to providing remarks. Can I please turn it over to you, Mr. Rupani?
Thank you, Veronica. Thank you for the opportunity to share some insights. This session here specifically on climate resilience needs of Pacific Island countries. I'll take us through a pictorial showing us the adaptation resilience needs in the Pacific. It's not new. It's been there for a while. The Pacific countries have individually sort of progressed these needs at different levels. So I'll take us through that, highlight some of the initiatives that's already with some of the countries, and conclude with perhaps focusing on what exactly do we need. So with that, the Pacific Island countries and climate change, it's very obvious. If you look around the Pacific, we have frameworks that talks about climate change. How do we respond? We have certain statements from Pacific Island leaders. We have national frameworks as well. If you look at, for example, the national determined contributions that at the national level, the region have also set up a NDC hub to specifically assist countries in that respect. So there's a lot of frameworks, there's a lot of policies, there's plans have outlined what the region need to do. So in this case, in terms of resilience. So as we go along, just a few snapshots to bring us into context. Yeah, this is just a reminder for a lot of us. So if we have, if you look around the Pacific, there's I would say evidence. You look at inundation, you look at coastal erosion. As we go along to bigger countries, you see landslides. As we go along, we experience flooding. As in this case, you can see the impacts of that. So these are just snapshots to remind us, what the Pacific is going through. Different countries have their own experiences with respect to what triggers the resilience needs they want or they need to do it. So with all these reminders to us, so what have the Pacific Island countries done? I'll focus on the 4 countries that we have focused on. That's Palau, Tonga, Fiji. As we go along the slides, so we'll see. So in Fiji, there's already adaptation needs worked with development partners to move communities from vulnerable areas. So this is already happening in the Pacific. This is for Fiji's case. As we go along, in terms of Palau, if you look at it, I mentioned their improved infrastructure, but we were just talking about energy needs. If you look at the infrastructure here in Palau, it simply reminds us the adaptation needs, the resilience. It's not only for communities, but this one highlights the aspects of energy infrastructure. Yeah, so you can see solar lights that's been along the causeway. You can see the power poles, and they're built to a standard that can withstand, erosion, can withstand perhaps king tides and so forth. So these are some of the, very visible very tangible. As we move along, in FSM, this is the Federated States of Micronesia. Aside from the evidence in terms of coastal erosion, there is continual work along this causeway, rehabilitation works to maintain erosion of the road. Aside from that, there's national adaptation planning. The Federated States of Micronesia currently through SPREP is undergoing a national adaptation planning. It's a 3-year sort of exercise that will help the stakeholders. As you know, the Federated States of Micronesia is a very, I'd say, diverse sort of country that have 4 states which are independent. So there's a lot of consultation, there's a lot of planning required. At the end of the day, the on-ground activities, so on-ground adaptation or resilient needs are done at the state level. So the current adaptation planning work that's happening in the FSM is quite crucial to highlight priorities in various sectors and to highlight plans on how do they proceed with this. At the same time, FSM has done is required, what sort of actions are required with the respective sectors. So with this, it's quite obvious in terms of what sort of adaptation needs or resilient needs that are happening across the Pacific. The Kingdom of Tonga, over here, I'd like to point out a couple of activities, and this is not
Hello, Mr. Rupani. Unfortunately, we cannot hear you. We can see your slide. Are you back?
all right, that was the original, and then with the one just beside it, that's what it looks like. There's water security activities that are happening with the outer islands. There is a food security activity. At the same time, while their adaptation needs, the Pacific Island countries have gone ahead with the renewable energy sort of targets. We heard from the last 2 presentations on what the needs are. SPC provided a very clear presentation on targets, consumption, and so forth. So with this couple of slides, it clearly demonstrates what's happening in the Pacific. As of now, for example, back to the FSM, there's currently a project on water security, including legislation work. This is through the Adaptation Fund, and it's held across the 4 states of Micronesia. So SPREP with the FSM is currently undergoing such activities. So if you look at resilient needs, it's very obvious in the Pacific. It doesn't mean the Pacific has not gone ahead to in that area. There's a lot of activities across different countries adapted to their national needs, their national capabilities. So this is a pictorial sort of a journey highlighting some of the work that has been done in the Pacific. At the same time, has reminded us on how vulnerable the Pacific is. And just to round up in summary, if you look at the topic of climate resilience needs of Pacific Island countries, I think definitely finance is one. And I understand our get together today and tomorrow will be looking at how can the countries be assisted. Finance is definitely one. In my current role at SPREP, we currently focus on climate finance. So that is looking at the GEF, the Adaptation Fund and the Green Climate Fund. So you're assisting countries to tap into this finance. At the same time, I know expertise specialists around the Pacific are limited. Yeah, so we do have them in the region, but it's limited to be deployed in every country, given the adaptation needs that we have. And finally, I think the most important part is action part. This is where we'll have a lot of policies, we'll have a lot of assessments. We have the support of, the local leaders. We have support of our development partners. We have support of financing multilateral entities. But this is something I think that's required action. We need to put something on the ground to enable resilience needs demonstrated, and the impact of those also realized to the respective communities. So it's a very short presentation from my end, but I hope that has been informative. Thank you very much, Veronica.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rupani Mario. Your comments were excellent. Certainly gave us, reiterated the need for, financing, expertise, and action. The next session is going to be all about funding opportunities that are available to support both clean energy and also climate adaptation in Pacific Island countries. And then tomorrow's session, the full 2 hours are going to be dedicated to providing presentations on experts that are able to do this type of work in Pacific Island countries. So without further delay, I would like to turn it over to Ms. Miko Makawa to provide her remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Please let me know when you're able to see my screen.
We are able to see your screen, but we see the slides. We're not seeing the full presentation screen.
I'm trying to put it in the slide mode. Somehow it is not reacting.
As you're doing that, I will say that, we understand we are running a bit late. So what we are going to do is, instead of doing a 5-minute break after this presentation, we are going to do a very, very brief Q&A. So if you have any questions, please input them into the Q&A. We're not going to be taking a break after that. We're going to go straight into the next session, and hopefully we will make up some of the time then. Miko, if it's not working for you, we can certainly, continue. And I think it's perfectly okay to move forward in this fashion.
Yeah, sorry. It seems that the slideshow function is not working properly. So I may have to go in this style. Well, thank you very much for this great opportunity. I will be talking about a study that we have conducted to understand and measure the risks of climate and ocean vulnerability in Suva, Fiji, the capital city of Fiji. I would like to also acknowledge my co-authors to carry out this study. Excuse me. As a background, the latest IPCC assessment reports alert that climate change is widespread, rapid, and intensifying. Human influence has warmed the climate at a rate that is unprecedented in at least the last 2,000 years. Unless there are immediate, rapid, and large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius will be beyond reach. Especially for cities, some aspects of climate change may be amplifying, including heat, since urban areas are usually warmer than their surroundings, flooding from heavy precipitation events, and sea level rise in coastal cities. However, cities are also part of crucial solutions to climate change through building green buildings, reliable supplies of clean water and renewable energy, and sustainable transport systems. Ocean Policy Research Institute of Sasaka Peace Foundation with the Stimson Center, a think tank based in Washington, D.C., we have carried out a study to assess various climate and ocean risks in developing coastal cities in the world. As you see here, cities are exposed to various risks which are caused by global climate change, as well as local anthropogenic activities, which are causing pollutions in the Bay Area. Also, underground water pollution, artificial coastal line changes, which are detrimental to long-term coastal line protection. So under this study, various risks have been categorized into 3 types, as you see here, which are ecological risk, financial risk, and political risk. The tool, which was developed by Stimson Center, Climate and Ocean Risk Vulnerability Index, in short, CORVI. The CORVI tool integrates economic, social, and environmental data to produce a holistic assessment to determine how resilient a coastal city is to climate and ocean risks. We use this CORVI tool to measure the risks in the cities that where we carried out these studies. As you see here in the CORVI wheel, there are 3 types of risks, which are composed of 10 risk categories. CORVI intends to be a decision tool for the future. It serves as a framework for cities to assess vulnerability to climate change. It enables clients to identify opportunities to build resilience where it matters most. It also serves to build resilience into future decision-making. Currently, CORVI assessment has been carried out in 5 different cities in the world, and 3 studies are also ongoing. We have also developed CORVI data portal, which you can access through this link where you can find the data and profiles of these different coastal cities in an interactive manner. Now, focusing on the study that we carried out in Suva, Fiji, as the previous presenters have already pointed out, Pacific Island countries are at the forefront of climate change, and they are exposed to hazards such as more intense tropical cyclones, rising sea levels, and coastal inundation. On Viti Levu Island in Fiji, where Suva is located, approximately 75% of the Fijian population live in coastal zones. Suva, as the capital city of Fiji, is home to 94,000 people, and the government institutions, the headquarters of most businesses and financial institutions, as well as regional and global organizations. It is also Fiji's primary transport hub. As a result, and we have carried out the Suva study by asking set of questions to experts to cover 97 indicators within CORVI from the 10 risk categories in comparison to other 12 coastal cities in the Pacific region as indicated here. The results are here, as you see. CORVI risks are assessed on a 1 to 10 scale, 10 being the highest risks. The CORVI risk profile shows that Suva has notably high exposure to extreme climate-related events, which is scored highest in the ecological risk dimension. We also noted a relatively high risk in the major industry categories, which has the second highest score among all the 10 categories. This indicates that Fiji's major industries are vulnerable to climate and ocean risks. These results were drawn from 74 survey responses in total by asking experts and stakeholders the critical questions which compose the survey CORVI assessment, and series of semi-structured interviews were also carried out to enforce our understanding and analysis. In addition, medium to high level of risk is found in Suva's stability, geology, and water and ecosystem category, which implies that Suva City is still being exposed to a great deal of risks of landslides and coastal erosion. One vivid example is the fact that location of many government offices are in low-lying areas in Suva, and these organizations maintain extensive paper records that are often housed on the ground floor. This presents significant risk inside and outside Suva, given the fact that Suva is an administrative and business center of the nation, as well as the hub of the Pacific region. In addition, rapid urbanization has resulted in an increase in informal settlers who are extremely vulnerable to climatic hazards, while populations living below the poverty line remain a crucial concern. CORVI assessment shows that risks are concentrated under climate, ecosystem, and industries in Suva City. Therefore, the following actions are the recommended action areas based on the study conducted. First is to develop climate risk-informed urban planning. Urban planning should be based on most up-to-date hazard information. Secondly, to pursue harmonized urban development and natural restoration. Suva is a rapidly developing and substantial amount of mangroves have been cleared to create space for new infrastructure. There should be ways to seek green infrastructure and necessary financing for it. Thirdly, to enhance the climate resilience of the tourism sector. Making use of the environmental and climate adaptation levy could be considered as one of the solutions to strengthen resilience in the tourism sector. We consider that these actions just mentioned could be implemented as part of adaptation and resilience building measures under the current Fiji's Climate Change Act, which was enacted quite recently last year in Fiji. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Nico, thank you very much for your remarks. That was an excellent presentation. I would like to turn it over to Naoki. I believe you have a question for all panelists. We are running a little bit behind time, so we are going to ask for your remarks to be very brief, and we apologize for that, but there's just so much great content that we're trying to get to the audience today. So Naoki.
Yes. So I would like to ask the panelists this question. This is a kind of general question, but what exactly the solutions and what kind of solutions and experts would you be interested in requesting to other participants in this forum? This is open to all panelists.
This is John. I'll go real quick before someone else jumps in. I would just say one of the most important ones that I think would be, important to include would be some community advocates. I think oftentimes in project development, we've noticed in Hawaii, some of the biggest hurdles we're running into right now is the community is being involved kind of at the end of the development process. And I think them being included at the end kind of makes them often feel heard or unheard. And oftentimes that causes a lot of friction, and we're seeing a lot of projects kind of meeting resistance that way. So I think we got the community involved and understand the process and how we are tackling this earlier on, and we heard from them and got their feedback earlier. I think that would really help out our process.
Thank you, John.
Very quickly from Rupeni here. What type of solutions? Sometimes the solutions are within us. It's only when you consult and then you get a solution. That's very obvious in what the Pacific have been doing over the last decade or so in terms of resilience. They're doing nature-based adaptation. They're working within their means to relocate people, address issues of climate change. So I think that these can be complemented as we look across specialized areas like engineering and so forth. So I think that's the sort of solution we're looking at. It's a blend. It's not one size fits all. It has to be tailored. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Naoki. It's Aquila here. I would like to respond to that question as well. So I think strengthening collaboration among partners and the countries and involving the countries in all the aspects of development in the Pacific is crucial. But I think it's a lessons learned for those of us who are working in the development space in the Pacific, that strengthening collaboration among partners, different partners, the private sector, international organization, academia, the communities, and the government. That sort of collaboration is needed. And a good example of that is when we are developing the energy framework, we must make sure that it was a very consultative process throughout those 2 years in 2020 and last year, leading up to the endorsement by the leaders. And we managed to get all the relevant crop agencies that I mentioned in my presentation, for all the CEOs of those agencies to sign and agree to jointly own and implement. Yeah, and we now are reaching out to a bigger pool of partners to implement the framework in the next decade. So I think strengthening collaboration and communication among partners on how we are going to put our resources together and be more and create synergies among our those initiatives will be very beneficiary for the Pacific. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all for your comments, and thank you, Naoki, for that excellent question. I would like to now go to our next session, session 2. In this session, we are going to be exploring available US and Japanese and other support measures and opportunities for international collaboration. I would like to turn it over to Naoki, who is going to make some quick remarks, and then we'll go into presentations.
Thank you. Just briefly, we've introduced the concept of the collaborative, and then in session 2, we would like to turn our focus on the left bottom circle, the funders, US, Japan, and other key organization support measures. And now let's dive into session 2. Thank you, Veronica.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, so next up on the agenda, Naoki, if you can please put the slide with all of the presenters.
Yes.
Thank you. So we have an esteemed lineup of presenters here. First, we're going to be hearing from Mr. Yasuyuki Okazaki, who is the director of the second North America Division, North America Affairs Bureau, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan for Pacific Island aid from Japanese government and also from the recently created Japan-US Clean Energy Partnership Framework. Second, we'll be hearing from Mr. Jonah Newman, who is the Energy Officer for Japan, Korea, Southeast Asia, Office of Energy and Diplomacy, Bureau of Energy Resources from the US Department of State. And last but not least, we are going to be hearing from Ms. Carol Litwin, who is the Senior Renewable Energy Specialist from the Green Climate Fund. So without further delay, I would like to turn it over to Okazaki-san for his remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Veronica-san, and thank you, Nagai-san, for organizing this excellent seminar and giving me a great opportunity to introduce the Japanese contribution to this region and in the area of the climate change actions. Well, and I'd like to renew my appreciation and tribute to PICHTR itself for its continuing initiative to organize this kind of seminars. And I'm very pleased to take part in today. Well, I understand, and sorry, let me start my self-introduction. I'm Okazaki, I'm Yasuyuki Okazaki. I'm director for the Second North American Division of Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan. My division is in charge of the US-Japan economic relations. And traditionally, my division devoted our resources pretty much into the trade negotiation between the Japan and the United States. But these years, our trade relations between the two countries, especially after the Japan-US trade agreement, were very stable and progress very smoothly. So now we have a luxury for two countries to invest our resources into the more global and regional cooperation in economic areas, including climate change countermeasures. So today, I understand we are expected to discuss about the contribution to promoting the collaboration between Japan and the United States in climate change areas. Also, our collaboration and our cooperation with third countries in the Pacific regions for clean energy initiatives and climate actions. In line with this object, today I'd like to share broad overviews on the Japanese official assistance in the Pacific region and our unique joint program by the Japan and the United States that we call Japan-US Clean Energy Partnership. We call it JUCEP, J-U-C-E-P. So first, I'd like to start the share the PowerPoint slide. Just a moment. Slide show どうしたらいいんだっけ？これか。これ？ Okay, I think that now all of you can see my slide of the presentation. First, I would like to start with the Japanese government's climate-related support. Well, of course, Japan is fully committed to global counter climate change efforts. And as you know, last April, we announced its new updated national determined contribution toward 2030. It is relatively ambitious for our nations, but we are really determined to make utmost efforts to achieving these ambitious goals. But not only for our own goals, we would like to continue our global contribution to the effort of other countries, especially the developing countries in the world, to make progress towards our shared goals of the counter climate change actions. So from 2016 to 2020, Japan has provided public and private sector assistance. It totaled approximately 12 billion each year. And Japan also will provide climate finance, again, both public and private, totaling 60 billion over the next 5 years from 2021 to 2025, which is kind of the same level of the support as the period of the during the last 5 years. In addition to that, our Prime Minister Kishida attended the COP26 last fall, and he announced in Glasgow World Leaders Summit, Japan will provide up to $10 billion on top of it already committed $60 billion in the coming 5 years. And Japan will also double our assistance in the areas of the adaptation, which makes our assistance approximately $15 billion approximately. Well, these assistance includes the following project. For example, of course, we extend our national ODA bilateral support to many developing countries. And we also committed ourselves to the multilateral efforts, such as the Green Climate Fund. And we established a unique mechanism by contributing developing countries' carbon reduction, emission reduction. Japan also achieved our national target. We call it the joint crediting mechanism. Probably the many developed countries follow this kind of mechanism to support the developing countries in carbon neutral society. But also we are extending many technical support to developing countries, which includes initiatives for the overseas deployment of the decarbonization technologies. As you know, Japan is not a resource-rich country, so we have a long history to investing in energy-saving systems or technologies. So we are sharing these technologies and know-how with the developing countries to contributing to the climate change actions. And then next slide is our assistance focusing on the Pacific Island countries, which is also today's theme. Well, Japan has been hosting the summit level meeting named the Pacific Island Leaders Meeting since 1997. After that, Japan has been hosting a summit level meeting every 3 years, and had the 9th summit last year. We recognize that Pacific Island countries face various challenges, including small and dispersed land areas, difficult access to the international major market, and the vulnerability to national disasters and climate change impact. Through this PAM, we call it a PAM process. Japan has been exchanging views with Pacific Island countries leaders at the highest level for their stability and prosperity, and committed ourselves to closely working together to find solutions to various issues they face. Well, through this PAM process, we achieved many cooperation projects. For example, in 2015, through the seventh PAM meeting, we launched Pacific Climate Change Center, PCCC, located in Samoa. And we have provided many capacity building training programs to contribute to climate-related initiatives in Oceania regions. And in 2018, we had a unique project for Tonga in Tonga to establish the movable and tiltable wind turbine maintenance system. Today, I have a short movie to show you about this project. So just I will share. I will put this movie on the screen a little bit later. And 2022, we invited young administrators from Pacific Island countries who are expected to make a great contribution for the future of these Pacific Island countries as a follow-up project of the PAM9 organized in July 2021. So let me show the short movie, just a moment.
Over the years, we have been impacted by several major hurricanes because of climate change. And we know the reality is that fossil fuel is a major contribution. So in the last 10 years, the government of Tonga put together the goal of becoming 50% renewable by 2020. And through the assistance of the Japanese government, we have already installed tiltable wind turbines and also the microgrid system. The tiltable design is integral for the tropical cyclones that we endure. This allows the team to tilt them down to ground level.
We are supporting Tonga by implementing 5 tiltable wind turbines, enabling it to avoid harsh climate conditions. The project is part of the Hybrid Island initiative proposed by Japan.
We're very grateful for the partnership with the Japanese government. Not only are we able to install solar and wind projects, but we're also able to maintain the system as we move on into the future.
Okay, thank you very much. This is a very short movie, but you can grasp the image of our assistance in the Pacific Island countries. Well, the feature of this program is, of course, it's exploiting the technology of the renewable energy, that is a wind turbine. But not only that, we invested in Tonga through the cooperation with our island areas, Okinawa. So we are established kind of the network between the small islands areas between Japan and the Pacific Islands countries. So just I would like to briefly touch upon finally the JUSEP. This is a Japan and a unique program between Japan and the United States. And through the bilateral cooperation, we extend assistance to developing countries in Asia, especially, and then on their energy areas, because our action against climate change is closely related how we are able to help developing country transfer, make the smooth energy transition towards renewable and new energy resources. So this type of assistance is very crucial for achieving our shared goals. Currently, we put the focus more on the Southeast Asia, but we would like to explore the possibility to extend our joint cooperation toward the Pacific Islands areas. So we would like to continue this type of assistance and contribution together with the United States. And I fully expect the intellectual input from the PICHTR and the other resource persons participating today. So we'd like to continue this type of exchange of the views and the discussion. And thank you very much for this opportunity, and thank you very much for kind listening to me.
Thank you very much, Okazaki-san. Very much appreciate your remarks. Next, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Jonah Newman from the U.S. Department of State. He is going to provide remarks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It is a real pleasure to join you all today to speak about U.S. government support for clean energy and climate resilience in the Pacific Islands. Last month's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report showed that climate change is destabilizing the entire planet, which the Pacific Islands know all too well. We must urgently accelerate global efforts to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and we recognize how critical a role the islands have had in pushing global ambition. Pacific Islands were champions for the 1.5 degree target in the Paris Agreement, and we are keen to continue working with you to ramp up ambition efforts internationally. I want to thank Director Okazaki for his valuable remarks, his fascinating video. I'm very jealous. I'm going to recommend that to my colleagues here at State Department, and the tremendous work that the Japanese government is doing to address climate change in the Pacific Islands and in the wider Indo-Pacific region. Japan and the United States launched JUSIP last year to accelerate the deployment of clean energy and decarbonization in Indonesia. This year's partner country is Indonesia. The governments of Japan, the United States, and Indonesia are eager to increase cooperation to advance the energy transition in Indonesia. As Director Okazaki mentioned, we've already had a number of events, including a policy toolkit event, which brought together roughly 300 private sector executives, government officials, and NGOs to learn about the financing, insurance, and technical advisory support which the US and Japanese governments can provide to assist business investment. Moving forward, Japan and the United States will collaborate with our Indonesian partners to highlight and advance investment opportunities in the country. JUSIP is structured to focus on engaging with the private sector because of its central role in making needed investment in decarbonization and clean energy. Our partnership brings the combined capacities of the US and Japanese governments to bear on these challenges. We have dozens of programs which can assist countries as they strategize how to increase private sector investment. JUSIP also brings the deep relationships our two governments have with the private sector actors and other governments to convene public sector and private sector leaders to solve problems and formulate solutions. But how can the US government help with clean energy and climate resilience investment in the Pacific Islands? While the United States possesses many agencies to assist with clean energy and climate resilience, today I'm going to focus on just a few, starting with the US Agency for International Development, also known as AID. AID plays a vital role in addressing climate change by partnering with more than 45 countries to implement emissions reduction measures, advance the transition to renewable energy, build resilience, and promote the flow of capital toward climate positive investments. AID resilience activities address common climate and disaster preparedness issues in many of the islands by strengthening their abilities to plan, finance, and lead their own sustainable development. AID can help countries obtain direct accreditation to successfully apply for and manage multilateral climate finance from the Green Climate Fund and other climate finance entities. AID supported the accreditation of Tuvalu's Ministry of Finance and Economic Development as a national implementing entity of the Adaptation Fund, an organization which finances projects and programs that help vulnerable communities adapt to climate change. Tuvalu is the second country in the Pacific after the Cook Islands to receive accreditation from the Adaptation Fund. AID has also helped our partners identify and prepare bankable project proposals valued at nearly $141 million that have been submitted to leading international climate finance entities, with more on the way. Finally, AID works to support renewable energy infrastructure in the Pacific Islands through training programs, which have increased the skills of local technicians to install, operate, and troubleshoot clean energy technologies. But AID doesn't act alone. One of its key partner agencies is the US Trade and Development Agency, known as TDA, the US government's overseas project preparation agency. TDA funds feasibility studies, technical assistance, and pilot projects to help our partners structure bankable infrastructure deals in emerging markets, such as Tonga. TDA also sponsors partnership building events, including forums, workshops, and reverse trade missions that link US companies to infrastructure opportunities overseas. For nearly 30 years, TDA has worked closely with our partners in the Indo-Pacific region to back infrastructure priorities, supporting over 700 infrastructure projects. TDA has found that investors are without question interested in markets like the Indo-Pacific. However, investments often get stalled due to lack of qualified bankable deals. We've seen this in a number of countries. Investors are looking for projects to feed into their pipeline. That's where TDA steps in, to help partners to prepare bankable projects that attract financing. In this way, TDA can also connect qualified projects with sister agencies in the US government that have important financing tools, including the US Export-Import Bank and the US International Development Finance Corporation. I'd like to talk about an upcoming TDA project in Tonga, focused on power sector decarbonization. TDA intends to fund a grant to the state-owned utility Tonga Power Limited for a feasibility study to support renewable energy transformation and decarbonization of the power sector. The project will analyze the technical and economic feasibility of a variety of energy resources and infrastructure solutions, including solar photovoltaic installations, battery energy storage systems, and smart grid infrastructure. The project will support Tonga's strategic energy goals by providing reliable and competitively priced energy and reducing the impact of carbon-based energy production. I'd like to wrap up by introducing you to the work of the US International Development Finance Corporation, or DFC. The mission of the DFC, as you may already know, is to advance development in emerging economies and bolster US public diplomacy through investment with private sector partners. It's America's development bank. We believe these investments, with a focus on entrepreneurship and dynamism, reflect the best in American values. DFC has active projects in about 100 countries, 60% of which are in low and lower middle income countries. DFC is focused on a number of sectors, but energy and climate change are central to its mission. DFC is targeting at least 33% of new investments to climate-related projects beginning in fiscal year 2023. DFC offers direct loans, loan guarantees, political risk insurance, and also equity financing. DFC can provide up to $1 billion in debt financing per project and up to $30 million for equity financing. They also provide assistance with conducting feasibility studies and training in order to improve a project's impact. The process from sourcing a project to commitment are unique for each project, but can take from 4 to 6 months to well over a year for small to medium projects, and possibly a few years for large infrastructure projects, depending on the time to get permits and conduct environmental and social impact assessments. DFC processes are similar to other development finance institutions like the World Bank. I hope this gives you some idea of the support the US government is able to bring to bear to help with projects in the Pacific Islands, whether in partnership with Japan or bilaterally with Pacific Island nations. We look forward to working together to address climate change and prepare the region for a safe and prosperous energy future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonah, for your excellent remarks. I would like to now turn it over to Ms. Carol Litwin, who's going to provide some brief remarks. As a heads up, unfortunately, Jonah and Carol are not going to be available for the Q&A at the end of the session, but we are going to be opening up the Q&A for all of the presentations from today, with those 2 exceptions. Carol.
Thank you very much, Veronica, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to present to you on behalf of GCF, and I will be sharing my screen with you. Let me know if you can see this.
Yes, we can see it, but we're not seeing in slideshow mode. There you are, perfect.
Okay, thank you. My name is Carol Litwin. I am the energy sector lead, senior energy specialist at the Green Climate Fund. I belong to the division of mitigation and adaptation, which is the public sector arm of the GCF for operations. And I work across both the private and the public sector. So let me go on to the next slide. Here, what you can see in front of you is IRENA's abatement scenario and priorities for the energy sector. And here you can see the focus is on generation and energy efficiency and also electrification of end use. And if we take a look at the priorities of the GCF moving forward, we are currently in what's called GCF1, that is our funding cycle, for which we receive commitments from governments around the world to deploy for climate projects. We are moving shortly this year into what's called GCF2, which is a new replenishment cycle. And for GCF2, we have been preparing a number of strategic documents that will guide our investments moving forward. And particularly important for the energy sector is the GCF Energy Generation and Access Guide. This was out for consultation last year and is now being published sometime the first part of 2022. And we also have a second energy guide called that's focused on energy efficiency, which will be published within the next month. Both of these guides are very well aligned to the IRENA abatement scenario. They are both focused on deployment of mature technologies. We allow for some innovation. These guides will be available on our website. We also have an updated strategic plan, and this is where the board of GCF outlines its strategic priorities. And one of the issues that's particularly affected the energy sector is that this is a traditional mitigation sector, particularly when it comes to generation. We are replacing fossil fuels, and therefore it's mitigation. It's less of an adaptation sector. However, the board has a 50-50 allocation of funding between mitigation and adaptation. And this, of course, poses a challenge for us in the energy sector and has affected the way we have the directions in the two energy guides. We have also one more priority that I have not listed here is most of the funding of GCF is channeled through international organizations down to projects, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. However, the board now wants us to work much more with what's called direct access entities. These are accredited entities by GCF, but they are national or regional. One example in the Pacific is, of course, the Fiji Development Bank, but it could also be ministries, whoever is accredited. This does not mean that we are not going to channel any funds through the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank or GIZ, etc. But we would give priority to the national organizations. And I think that's good news for the Pacific, but I would look forward to the countries coming forward with more accredited entities that are national or regional. If we take a look at the energy generation and access guide, and we take a look at the priorities here, one is, of course, low emission power generation focused on mature technologies. Geothermal is one of them, bioenergy, hydropower, ocean, solar, and wind. The second area is in the transmission and distribution. Also, we've included storage here because that is on one part, storage is generation. On the other side, it's also on the transmission side to, for instance, for kickstart, for managing voltage fluctuations, etc. on the grid, and to improve the flexibility in general. And the reason why we're including this, the focus on distribution and transmission, is that is one of the bottlenecks that most countries have, particularly smaller systems that can, maybe it's easy the first 10% of renewable, intermittent renewable energy, but once you reach 20, 30, 40%, it becomes a technical hurdle because these grids were built for stable thermal power. So we have decided we need to focus on this, and we would also like to see, particularly from island countries, that more resilience is built in. So this could potentially be an adaptation project here. And then we also have a third pillar here, that's renewable energy access. This is cooking, grid connections, off-grid electricity and solar home systems. These types of projects give very little mitigation impacts because they are so small. So we would like to see them now justified on the basis of adaptation. What happens on the household size, on the household side, demand side, can we promote businesses, diversification of incomes, etc. If we take a look at the energy efficiency guide, this energy efficiency particularly important in these days and ages when we have the increased volatility. 6 months back, we have seen a lot of changes on the energy markets globally, culminating with the war in Ukraine, which will have a huge impact on fuel importing countries. And energy efficiency is the least cost way for countries and power systems, both on the supply side and on the demand side, to become more resilient. So we are focused here on number one, industrial energy efficiency. And here we're looking at industrial processes. This could be the beer factory in Samoa. This could be heat plants. It could be recycling and just industrial innovation. So it's a bit of supply side as well. It could be shifting some of the heat processes from thermal into renewable energy. It could be CSP, may not be applicable to the Pacific. But we also have space, what we call space energy efficiency. And this is really about reducing consumption in heating, cooling, lighting, and industrial and commercial spaces. We know the key driver in the future for electricity, growing electricity demand is going to be in the cooling sector. So while we want to provide cooling, cooling is also increasing GHG emissions through the gases. So we need to be very efficient in the way we provide cooling for households and commercial spaces. And the last one is more on the household side. It is on appliances, equipment, energy efficiency. So this is what the second guide is about. Now I'd like to move over a little bit to introduce the GCF business model to give you some of the basics. The way GCF works is we receive project ideas. Some of the project ideas will come from us and we will approach accredited entities. These are entities that are either local, regional, international. They can be banks, they can be organizations, they can even be ministries. Some of the national, what's called the NDAs that work, these are government ministries that work with GCF, can also be accredited entities. We channel our funding through them down to the project. So that's the 3 steps that you see here. So GCF is really, we don't do projects ourselves. We review, we assess the projects and we support the accredited entities, but the projects are really done by locally and through accredited entities. The accredited entities may assign an executing entity. I'll give you one example. Let's say that the Fiji Development Bank wants to work with GGGI. And GGGI can then be assigned as an executing entity, or SPC can be assigned as an executing entity because they have special expertise that is useful for that particular project. The projects that we approve, or that is approved by the board, need to have a very strong climate rationale for either mitigation and or adaptation to receive financing. It needs to be evidence-based. We have climate specialists who come from sciences that really look through the projects. Myself, I come from the energy sector, so I look at the energy sector rationale, whether it makes sense in the context of the sector, but I also look at how it's structured financially, if that makes sense, and whether the project can be sustainable with beyond the GCF financing. We have a number of investment criteria. I'm not going to go through them now, but they are available on our website. If we take a look at some of the financing instruments that we have, some of you will have already been involved in our readiness support that supports plans and help countries prepare for climate projects. We also have the project preparatory facility where you can receive up to 1.5 million, normally in grants or reimbursable grants, to help prepare projects. And the reason why GCF provides a project preparatory TA is that we want to make sure that if we receive a good project idea, but we notice that it's not ready to move to approval, we can then agree with the accredited entity and say, listen, we'll provide you with some TA here to prepare this project so that you can go to the board later when you have fully developed the idea to a good investment proposal. I mentioned before DMA, we also have PSF, that's the private sector facility of GCF. So if you are a private sector entity, you would go accredited entity, you would work with the PSF. If you are government or you're public sector, a national development bank, etc., you would work through DMA, and most likely I would be the contact point for the energy sector. So the type of instruments that we provide, we are quite flexible. So we can do most things. There's no clear rules. However, the targets move all the time. For every board, the board will decide, no, we need to move this a little bit. We need to, for instance, one of the issues now is moving away from grants, because we have seen that a lot of the projects are simply not replicable after the GCF financing has ended, but we would like to also use our public sector resources to leverage in more private sector investments to achieve scale. Other instruments are reimbursable grants, equity, debt, and guarantees. We can also take first loss, for instance, first loss positions in funds. And I'll give you an example. This is not a fund, but it is a geothermal project. So we're working on a large geothermal project in Latin America and Caribbean. Currently, this is under preparation. And where the issues are, as most of you know, it's in the drilling risk. So here GCF will go in and take the drilling risk. So there is a 40 to 60% chance of being unsuccessful in the drilling. So that is a risk that GCF would take. Of all the financing organizations that I know of, and I have a background in IFIs, I can tell you that GCF has most risk appetite of them all. And one of the reasons for that is that we are not rated with the rating agency. So we don't have a AAA rating that we need to protect. So we can take more risks. And some renewable energy projects do require more risk taking. So that we can do. We're also looking at insurance products, particularly for, this is more adaptation projects in the agricultural sector, but it can also be for mini grids. So let me stop here on the financing, and I'm happy to take your questions or you can contact me directly through my email address that is provided there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carol. I understand you need to go, and we're so appreciative for your time. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Naoki for questions.
Yes, we have one question from the audience. This is towards the GCM. How many Pacific Island countries have signed up for this framework?
So I think all of the Pacific countries are able to access GCF. If you have an NDA in the country, I think it's actually all. The full country list is available on our website, where you can look at the specific, but if you have a specific country in mind, I can probably look it up for you. But I think it's actually all. I'm a little bit uncertain about Nauru, but I actually think Nauru is in there as well. But the important part here, let's say you are a project developer and you have you want to do solar projects across the Pacific. You need to liaise with the NDAs in each of these countries because they have to agree. The NDAs at the core of the GCF model is country ownership. This is at the core. GCF will never walk away from that. This is very important for our board, and the NDAs represent the governments when it comes to the projects and the plans. So if you have a project idea, go and speak to the NDA. Make sure that they are on board, and then you have to work through an accredited entity if you are not accredited yourself. You can also, which is not for project developers, but whether you're a private sector bank or whether you're an international organization or a local organization, you can become accredited. You have to go through the accreditation process. There are specialists within GCF that would handle that. That information is also available on our website.
Thank you very much. And then there's we have one more question from to Okazaki-san and Mofa.
Right.
Yeah. So how many countries have signed up for the carbon credit program?
You mean the how many overall?
Oh no, sorry. So thank you, Carol. So there's a question towards the Japanese government, and then the question is how many countries have signed up for the carbon credit program that you have described, Okazaki-san?
Thank you, Nagai-san. You mean the joint credit mechanism, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And currently, we have 17 partner countries, which covers not only the Asian but also the African countries and some Latin American countries also. So now the 17.
Okay, thank you. Maybe the for the entire panel, this maybe the final question. Has your commitment to Tonga has been enhanced since the recent volcanic eruption and associated tsunamis that happened recently?
Well, we don't know exactly what happened to our project by the tsunami and volcanic eruption. But the point of our project, especially the infrastructure project in the Pacific Islands, though each facilities can be maintained by the recipient country itself. So our assistance will not end by the constructing the infrastructure system itself, but we are extending our assistance through the life cycle of the infrastructure. So we are extending our technical assistance on how to maintain those systems and the structure and the facilities. So I hope after that natural disaster, they have a good know-how and resources to maintain their infrastructure facilities, including the wind turbine, so as to enable those infrastructure keep operating beyond the natural disaster. But that is a very good question. So I will recommend my colleagues of the International Cooperation Bureau to follow up the status of that project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for those remarks. We have one last question for Carol, if you have time for it. This is from Aquila Tawake. The Pacific would need a risk mitigation facility through GCF for geothermal development similar to the ones in Latin America. How do we go about this?
So, can you hear me? Yes, I'm on. Yeah, so a risk mitigation facility for the Pacific. I don't know how many. I know Fiji has geothermal, although I don't think if it's commercially viable or not. I don't know which other countries have it. But if there was I would start preparing a proposal and start discussing with an accredited entity that has capacity to actually take on such a project. This could be ADB, it could be, I think JICA is accredited, it could be the Fiji Development Bank if they have the capacity. 6 PICs have geothermal potential. Yeah, so if you would develop, so the way we have done it for Latin America, it's the full value chain of geothermal. So we go from drilling to power generation or heat generation to end use. Even hydrogen is actually involved for the transport sector, is one of the end use sectors. So for instance, Costa Rica actually has excess geothermal. They cannot absorb it locally, so they would need to export. So they will export the components, ammonia, for green hydrogen production. We know there's a scarcity of green hydrogen on the market, so they would actually look to export that. So that's one thing that we would support. So you would have countries like Fiji that needs to green the transport sector, so that would be an excellent, but they may have excess. So then we would look at an export market there. So we could support throughout the value chain, but we wouldn't take on 100% of the risk. We would take on a portion of the risk, a portion of the drilling risk, and then you would need to make sure, there's a lot of work that goes into this. You would need to make sure that there are project developers and investors that would be willing to do, for instance, geothermal power generation projects from the geothermal. So you would need probably private sector investors in that chain. Because these projects are not particularly risky, I don't think there's a role for GCF there. I would rather put our money into the drilling risk and maybe a bit on the hydrogen, because there is some risks there as well. So I would start speaking to an accredited entity with capacity, because this is a large, if you're doing a facility, that's very large.
Great, thank you so much for your guidance on that, Carol. Very much appreciate all of your remarks as well. Same for Jonah and Yasuyuki-san. Thank you very much. Naoki, next slide, please. Well, this concludes day one of our forum for today. We are very much grateful for all of the excellent speakers, for all of your questions. Just to remind you, tomorrow we are having day number 2, session 3, where we are going to be doing an expo of various clean energy and climate adaptation resilient solutions from experts and companies from around the globe. So with that, I thank you all very much for participating. My warmest aloha to all of you, and thank you so much to all of the panelists. Until tomorrow, goodbye.